merci Christophe, et merci pour l'introduction. Je vais parler en anglais si c'est OK avec tout le monde. So yes, Christophe already introduced me. I'm part of the Analima group, and here as part of the Analima group, a project that Alain and I have been working on for 15 years, so for quite a while. And here is a selection of some of the works that we're doing. Most of the work that we're doing is interactive, is participatory, and is site-specific and mostly immersive, and we're very much interested in exploring the intersection between sound and vision. And we're doing this really by involving the audience. And today we're going to talk about one of the projects that we've been doing together, but it's the outcome of quite a bit of research, ultimately at the beginning into the mathematics and the physics of this intersection between matter and sound and visual representations, different visual representations of sound. Alain and I were part of a group of 4, so there's Evgenia Emmets and David Negrao, this is us at the Tate, and this is also the project that we're going to talk about. But before doing that, I thought I should cycle back and give you a bit of an overview of other projects that Alain and I have been working on. One of them was for Ars Electronica, and also links to this idea of active remote listening at a distance. So Groupthink was a project that originated at the National Gallery and was proposed for Ars Electronica, and it was about listening remotely and exploring the idea of liveness post-COVID, when we didn't really have liveness, right? So we were all disconnected from each other. We were not really able to be in the same room, to feel each other's sweat, heartbeat when experience a live performance. And so what we thought to do was to create a thermodynamic interface whereby we were measuring heartbeats of the audience, and this became effectively the beat for visualizations. As the project was situated at the National Gallery, we were working with images from the National Gallery and paintings from there, and then used AI to create a visual score. And this visual score was then performed live by 2 performers, which you see here. This is Professor Mick Grayson at the Creative Computing Institute in London, and Dr. Shama Rahman, who is an artist and a singer, and so she was performing the sitar here. And so the visuals that you see in the background, these were created through AI, Gen AI, just exploring this liminal space between paintings, specifically looking at representations of nature, and they were animated through the heartbeat of the audience. So the audience was listening to the music, and then the music was driving and generating these visuals, and that in fact affected the heartbeat of the audience, and there was a sense of entrainment that happened in this process. Bit of a complex project, but a really interesting one in the context of this particular topic. But back to the Analima group, and back to the work that we have been doing. One of the first large-scale projects that Alain and I were working on was at the Roundhouse in London. We were commissioned by the Roundhouse for the 50th anniversary to create a participatory installation. And here we were working for the first time about 10 years ago with machine learning patterns and training effectively a system through input of different human voices and mapping these voices onto visual representations. So here in the background you see voices generated by a group of people singing into a microphone, and then these voices were analyzed for sonic characteristics, and depending on the tonality, also how fricative the sounds were, these were then mapped onto different visual expressions using machine learning patterns. And this was then displayed in the rounds. I'll play just a couple of seconds of this performance. So this was one of our first projects where we really explored this participatory idea. And the joy came from the audience and the sense of complete strangers making sounds together and feeling deeply connected with each other, even though they've never met before. And so it became this idea of a Gesamtkunstwerk where, the sum is larger than the sum of its parts. And the fact that actually this idea of connection happened inspired further research into this area. It was also directly related to this idea of cymatic patterns and mathematical and quite literal representation of sound. This is a project we did at a church in London called the Union Chapel. We have different musicians creating real-time representations of sound here. And this was one of the first times where we're also working with the human voice. And this is another one of our key projects called Kima Voice. And here we're looking at harmonies, vocal frequencies between two different singers, seeing, exploring if they feel actually more socially connected after singing together and humming together. We've just come back from a presentation at the Ars Electronica Center in Linz, where we had first a residency and then an installation. And we're looking at the calming quality of humming and the effect it has on the human body, and again on this idea of social connectedness. And this is also the background for the project Kima Noise that I want to present here. So Kima Noise came out of this idea of social connectedness, this interest in listening at a distance, but also all of the things that Alain just mentioned. So this idea that actually the sounds around us, they affect us, they affect our idea of self, they can affect our health, and they can actually affect also how we feel with each other, because ultimately these noises are a shared space, are part of this intersubjective space that we all share. In this project, the audience is creating their own soundscape through streaming points, and they are interacting with each other through a drawing interface. And the hope is that actually through this process, they're creatively engaging with the noises that surround us and becoming more aware of them, and also aware of the agency they actually have in the process. So this is the first iteration of the interface, which is essentially a touchscreen, and you can draw your own interpretation of noise in front of you. And by doing that, you're manipulating sound trajectories through a 360 speaker system that is set up around you to create sound trajectories or digital sound walks. I wanted to point again to this idea of intersubjectivity, that very often noise is perceived as something very subjective, very personal, right? Everybody has a different perception of what a noise is, what bothers us. The very high frequency pitched sounds or very rhythmic sounds of a construction site can be very annoying for others, and for others it's music, it's something to work with, it might be a material in its own right. And so here we try to create a creative interface for physical and tactile engagement with these noises. There's a lot of research in how noise affects our health, and that research goes back 50 years, from the 1970s onwards. Specifically, we know that noise affects our attention, our ability to learn, to comprehend, specifically school children, right, are directly affected by noise. We know from airports that people who live under airports or flight paths, that this affects their learning and can also affect their mood dramatically, including their aggression levels, how annoyed they are, and anger. And of course, it also affects us physiologically, right? So louder noise levels can lead to increased anxiety, to irritation, and of course also to sleep deprivation. There have been several very large-scale studies, so none of this is new. I'm sure most of you will be familiar with this, that there's a link between fatigue, somnolence, sleep disturbances, instability, but also with this physiological effects, and that can actually include diabetes. So this really large study with 350,000 people showed that actually there's a direct link between noise levels and diabetes, and also, of course, heart pressure and heart rates. So we also know that there's a link between noise and the political environment where people live. So people who are in more affluent areas tend to live in quieter areas. Noisier areas tend to actually be the ones that are more deprived. And at least in the UK, there's very little policy around this. So there's a real lack. We've been working quite a lot with DEFRA, so with the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, but also with local councils like the Council of Greenwich. And the fact is there's very little legislation in the space. So there's an Environmental Protection Act from 1990, but there isn't really all that much to really protect people from complaining about noises. So what we wanted to do with this project is to create awareness for noise. There was a bit of a selfish aspect to this. I live in an area in London that is both quite affluent, but also directly near a flight path and a major highway. And it is very noisy. And so my art studio is directly under this flight path and under this highway. And this is where we did our very first testing and created and designed this interface. And so initially, we mapped these noises onto visual forms. So you could see a visual effect of the decibels of the noise levels around you, and that would affect a very simple particle system. But then also we were working with this idea of the drawing interface and streaming live sound points from across the area. And when we were approached by Tate Modern, we initially thought this is going to be a challenge to actually stream from around the Tate Modern into the space at the Tate. But we were actually quite lucky that the Tate was very open to the idea of streaming, and we had these 4 different streaming points, one under the railway arches, one on the roof of the Tate, and 2 surrounding the Tate, streaming these into the space at the Tate where we had an installation. It was quite a large floor, and the audience or participants had the possibility to then select from these 4 different streaming points, yeah? And through them, they could stream these sounds from around the Tate into the Tate and then animate them through drawing. So as you draw, you basically change the sound trajectory through a speaker system around you. You can see it was quite a large speaker system, so I think in the end we had about 15 different speakers all set around you, and through moving on this touchscreen and selecting different sources, you can create your own sound walk. And that's quite, it was really relevant to audiences, local audiences around the Tate. So there's about 90,000 people living in Bankside, which is the area in Southwark where the Tate is situated. And it's an area where there's huge amounts of construction and where a lot of people are actually pushed out of their homes, right? So there's not enough discussion about it. It's also directly on the flight path. It's right next to the Thames, so the flights are literally just above this particular area. And it was fascinating to see the planes outside and then stream the sounds into the space and see how much we're actually blocking out daily, right? How much we're busy trying to avoid the sounds around us. So we combined this with workshops with local community members, tours, and publications, and also with a real-time visualization. So here you can see we then mapped these noise sources onto 4 different displays that were projected onto the windows, and you could see architectural sites like the Shard being deformed depending on the noise levels that were happening in real time around the Tate. And what is so interesting is this idea of active listening, because you became a bit more aware of the noises around you as you were interacting with them. I mentioned before, so we published a small monograph as part of this, which featured interviews with experts, interviews with local community members, and also some of the underlying background research that we have done. And this was a starting point for further development and further research into live streaming and remote listening at a distance, which formed part of a project that was funded by the HIC, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, with the NHS, Brunel, and the Anna Lima Group. And here we tried to take the site-specific project into an online space, which sounds trivial, but really wasn't, because obviously there's questions around latency, about real-time interaction, around feedback. But the idea was to make the interface much more accessible for anybody. We're working within co-design workshops, so with young people who all gave their input and helped us to develop the project further. And it now exists as an app which you can access on your phone to stream live from different points, well, from anywhere around the world, really. So, yeah, this particular project looks at social connectedness, and this is where these different strands kind of come together, and whether people actually feel more socially connected by engaging in these participatory art interfaces. We displayed the project a couple of times, so at Somerset House, at a gallery in London called Cable Depot, and the interface is also live. So actually, we do want to invite you to try it out. It's accessible for anybody around the world, and I'll just share very quickly how it works. Essentially, as soon as you click on the app, you have the option to unmute your microphone, and at that point you start to stream your noise sources, so wherever you are, in a city, on a mountaintop, and you appear on this global map that is literally global, so it stretches around the globe, and it's using GPS and APIs to be able to stream with an accuracy of 5 to 10 meters, so quite a good accuracy. And you appear as this dot, and with that, people are able, around the world, are able to interact with you and draw on this map their own sound walks, their own sound trajectories. So it's quite a playful way of engaging with noises from around the globe and to listen at a distance. We looked obviously into theoretical footing as well, and a lot of the concepts that Alain was just mentioning before were really important. Jean-Luc Nancy's concept of resounding as well. Paulina Oliveros, Alain mentioned active listening at a distance. And this idea of being part of this global soundscape where participants draw their own impression of sounds and with that engage with these noises from across the globe. Yeah, so the two things maybe to also explain. So the app memorizes how fast you draw as well, right? So you can draw a very quick link between different sound sources. The closer you draw to a source, the louder it gets. If you draw further away, it becomes kind of less present. And so you can basically create all of these different soundscapes, sound walks digitally, and then you can save them and send them to yourself as well. Yeah, the paths are kind of remembered, and so the idea is that you're creating a sound walk similar to Richard Long's famous artwork, A Line Made by Walking, but you're doing this digitally. And the research aspect of the project was also quite successful. So we only had a small group of about 34, well, it was 34 students from University of Greenwich and Brunel University from the art therapy program. And we looked at a number of different things. So the idea of how the interaction with the app would actually change people's perceptions of noise. And we did find a really interesting response that post-survey, the amount of negative perceptions of noise halved, right? Because there was a creative, active engagement with the noise around you. So rather than being something negatively connotated, it became something positive, something more interesting. But we also felt that, or were able to measure that there's an effect on mood. There was an effect on the awareness of noise overall, and a measurable effect on social connectedness. So people felt more socially connected by interacting with each other, listening to each other's noises, and yeah, playfully interacting with the noises around them. I should mention, and I'm already wrapping up, that this is part of a larger research into participatory art and into the design of these participatory art interfaces. We did several different co-design projects, all hinging on different research areas. And we tried to distill our findings into these guidelines that are available online. So these are guidelines for other artists and practitioners to design their own interfaces. We're trying to think about questions about facilitation, accessibility design, the ethics of working with real-time data, the ethics of working with AI, the ethics of authorship. And so it's guidelines for artists and creative health practitioners who might have worked physically but maybe never in a digital space with each other. And they're now available online. And yeah, to summarize, so this is very much an interdisciplinary research like Alan described. So the idea of working across scientists, creative health practitioners, but also us as artists with the public, so with local communities and also with young people to explore listening at a distance. It is about visualizing noise and raising public awareness of this intersubjective nature of noise. Following these presentations at the Tate, the Sound Image Festival, Somerset House and others, we are presenting the project at the Houses of Parliament in the UK this November, which is really exciting. And we're also looking to develop the project further, really thinking about the quality of the noise and the role that AI can have in measuring the kind of different characteristics of noise and what they are, how we can visually represent them in different meaningful ways. Yeah, so if you're interested in the project or you want to explore it or want to access it or try it out, please do check out participateresearch.co.uk. You should be able to access the noise app there and play with it interactively. And I think that's me almost on time.